So those of you joining today have the privilege of hearing four distinguished speakers with a wealth of experience and insights to share from. So we have a lot to look forward to during the next hour. My name is Lena Sommer. I'm an advisor at the Education section at the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. There will be opportunities here to ask questions, so please write any comments or questions you have in the chat box, and we'll open up the conversation towards the end of the panel to respond to questions you may have. I'll spend a few minutes first just to set the stage for this panel, and then we'll jump into the conversation where the panelists will introduce their work. So being able to read is a basic right for every child and young adult. While school is a crucial place for learning, we know that the pandemic has dramatically changed the circumstances. We know that as many as 1.5 billion children and adolescents in more than 190 countries have been affected by countrywide school closures. We see or we estimate huge learning losses because of this, and we do see increased differences between poor and rich, between rural and urban settings, between the global north and the global south. And we also see that marginalized groups are falling further behind. As we know, these challenges come on top of an existing learning crisis, and UNESCO estimated back in 2017 that as many as 617 million children and adolescents worldwide did not achieve minimum proficiency levels in reading and mathematics. So we're truly starting to see the scope of an education catastrophe in the world. Now, this is quite a pessimistic view of the world. What I've presented so far is still just a selected piece of reality, I would say. During the past year and a half, we've also seen quite a lot of innovation. New initiatives have flourished to support children's reading and learning where they are. Homeschooling and distance learning solutions are rolled out in virtually all countries of the world, and there are more and more studies being published documenting the positive effects of tech-based literacy interventions. The smartphone market is expanding, meaning we can reach an exponential number of people at a significantly lower cost. Digital platforms also provide more responsive opportunities for user design, easier adaptations to teach at the right level, and highly potent sharing of content, of software and data as digital public goods. So the optimism of tech-based literacy interventions is almost bursting. So I would like to bring both of these perspectives into our conversation today. We know that there are positive trends as well as negative trends. There are great opportunities, but also huge challenges we need to relate to in order to stay relevant and realistic. So the mEducation Alliance is facilitating the Literacy League, which is a technical exchange networking platform for organizations focused on appropriate and scalable use of EdTech to support foundational literacy. So during this panel, we'll hear from Curious Learning, Google Read Along, and the Association for the Development of Education in Africa. But we'll start with Carolyn Johnson from Basic Education and Literacy Rotary Action Group. Carolyn is chair of the Basic Education and Literacy Rotary Action Group and vice chair for the Rotary Foundation's cadre of technical advisors. She has more than 30 years experience as a teacher, administrator, and consultant, and I look forward to hearing her reflections. So, Carolyn, can you give us a brief introduction of your work to support literacy?
Thank you so much, Lena. Yes, I work with Rotary International as a volunteer. Basic education and literacy is one of the 7 areas of focus that our 1.2 million Rotarians around the world focus on. And BELRAG, Basic Education and Literacy Rotary Action Group, is a group of educators and Rotarians who are specifically interested in improving the quality of education, both in our own communities and internationally. About 12 years ago, I traveled to Guatemala for the first time and was able to spend quite a bit of time in rural schools with Indigenous teachers and Indigenous children in Guatemala with an organization called COED, the Cooperative for Education. They had been involved for many, many years providing textbooks to middle school students. But the challenges they faced were that the textbooks were great, the technology platforms that they were providing were also wonderful, but the children didn't read particularly well. And so their challenge to me was, how do we create better readers? And from that, the Culture of Reading program was formed. I took early retirement, spent the next 1.5 years in Guatemala working with teachers and students, with the Ministry of Education, with local education organizations, to figure out what was needed by the local teachers, what was needed in the local schools, and how to create this robust training program, professional development program for teachers. Almost a dozen years later, the Culture of Reading program is still a part of COED, the Cooperative for Education. We are in 94 schools. We work with about 950 teachers, or have worked with about 950 teachers, and have reached almost 25,000 students. The model is that each year we bring in a new cohort cadre of teachers and work with them to do this professional development, provide the resources for their school, spend about a 4-year period within their school to make sure that the resources really are being used and the teachers are well grounded in the work that we're doing. And then believing that with this significant amount of support, we can move on and go to other schools and work with other teachers. So in that sense, it's quite replicable in what we're doing. I'm very proud to say that working with local teachers, working with local trainers in the school, our base, our cadre of people that are actually doing the training and working with the schools are all local Guatemalans, supported by Rotary, but it's all run and delivered by local Guatemalans to Guatemalan people. So that's my journey with GLP.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. It's really interesting to hear some great examples that are locally based as well, and where you really were you able to mobilize local resources and local people. Could you perhaps say something more about the impact you've seen through this engagement? And perhaps what sort of professional development interventions have been most impactful, and what resources in literacy education has proven most helpful?
Mm-hmm.
You could spend a few minutes on that. Thanks.
Sure. The thing that really struck me in these classrooms is to start with material for children. Some classes had textbooks, others did not, but teachers were trying to, and so this thing that we wanted to do was provide a rich environment for reading within the classrooms and provide lots of children's literature, picture books, board books for younger children, chapter books for older children, because the children in the culture was not that they learned to read for enjoyment or they learned to read for enrichment of their own lives. They learned to read words off a page, and the extension, the context, the understanding really was very lacking from the instruction in the classroom. So the first piece was to get good children's literature in the classrooms. The second piece was to provide the training for the teachers. And this took a lot of time, a lot of work, and many conversations on what the teachers already had in their background and what they were willing to accept, and then how we could develop a program to move them forward. So the training was adamant. After being in schools for many years, I was adamant that the training be over a long period of time. And as I said, we do multiple trainings a year. Each teacher is involved for at least a 2-year period. So we're there with them every step of the way. I think the third piece that really worked for us was coaching. And after we did the professional development with the teachers, then we would go into their classrooms a couple of weeks later to see how it worked. And they would do a model lesson that we would observe, or if they were struggling and not willing to teach with us in the classroom, we'd get up and show them how it works, show them what it really looked like with children. So that coaching was absolutely instrumental to the success of the program, in the sense that we were partners with them. We were showing them the way, but we were also holding their hand along this journey.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to our next panelists, which are Stephanie Gottwald and Tinsley Galyean from Curious Learning. Stephanie is the co-founder and director of content at Curious Learning. And among many other things, she has led the effort in Curious Learning to adapt an early literacy app, Feed the Monster, to 50 languages. Tinsley is co-founder and executive director at Curious Learning. He has extensive experience with developing media experience and interactive technology-driven projects. So Stephanie and Tinsley, good that you could join us today. Could you share a bit about what you're working with at Curious Learning?
Okay. Yeah, we're trying something novel here. We're trying to be in the same room during a presentation. Unusual. Let me share the screen quickly. We put together a few slides to give a kind of quick overview. So let's see if that. Bear with me for a second. Where?
Our screen.
There we go. Let's see if this works now. All right. Can you see the screen okay now?
Yes, great.
Okay, great. Thank you for bearing with me for a second.
So the floor is yours. If you're still there, Stephanie and Tinsley. We may have lost the connection. We're not able to hear you, at least. Okay, that's a shame. Once we got the picture up, we seem to have lost audio connection with Stephanie and Tinsley. I think as we're waiting for them to reconnect, we can move on to Anand Ramaswami from Google Read Along. Luckily, we have more panelists here today as well. So Anand is the program manager and head of content at Google Read Along. He has more than 14 years experience in education, working on curriculum design, content, and teacher professional development. So Anand, what is Google Read Along?
Great. Thank you so much, Lena, for the introduction. Let me just quickly, share my screen. I just put a couple of things together, which will.
So Anand, you're on mute. I think you have to start from the top again.
Okay, probably. Is my screen visible?
It's not visible now, but we can hear you at
Okay.
least. Oh,
Okay,
I think
good.
it's
I think
coming up.
now it's visible and I'm audible as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So Read Along basically is a learn to read app for the ages 6 to 10-year-olds. It uses Google's voice recognition and text-to-speech engine to help enable children to read better. So the mechanics are fairly simple. Within the app, you have lots of stories. Currently, we have 1,000+ stories for children in across 11 languages. The child can browse through the stories, select one story to start reading. So we believe in giving the agency to the child to actually select what they are interested in. When the child enters a story, what the child needs to do is actually read out the story out loud, right? So when the child reads it out loud, the voice recognition on the device understands what the child is speaking and highlights the words accordingly. If the child is not correctly pronouncing the word, it gives you a red underline. Now on the screen, the little girl that you see, her name is Dia. She is the friendly helper within the app. So whenever a child gets stuck reading a word, right, he's reading it either incorrectly pronouncing it, or is stuck, Dia actually pronounces it back for the child. And on tapping the word, any of the words, Dia doesn't just pronounce the word, but also explains the meaning of the word in their native language, right? So this basically provides the child, an assistive learning experience, right? The child, especially when we look at a lot of under-resourced places, right? You don't have good quality teachers who probably lack the professional development in terms of how to teach reading as a skill and so on. This technology solution comes to aid in terms of nudging children through the early part of reading, right? To make it much more interesting for the children, we, as I said, have a variety of content. We have also gamified the experience. You have vocabulary games, phonetic games, and so on within the app. And most of all, you have this collection of stars, which children really like, stars and badges and gifts as they keep reading more and more, which keeps motivating them. So this is the simple mechanics of how the app works. So till date, we launched it in April 2019, and till date, more than 12 million children have read more than 16 billion words through 300 million books on the app. Um, the mission for the team is to achieve universal literacy in reading. So we believe that we have, kind of embarked on the journey right now, having taken baby steps. We believe we have the right technology solution in place which can aid this. The app can work completely offline, right? So once the stories are downloaded, it can work completely offline. It is completely child safe. it does not really require a child to put in a phone number or an email ID or registration of any kind, right? So we don't collect any personally identifiable information when the child is using the app, and it's completely free, right? And it's available globally in I think around 180 plus countries in 11 different languages for now. So this is about the app. The way we are working right now, though it's a direct to consumer app, anyone can download it from the Android Play Store. What we are doing right now is working with organizations like state governments, ministries of educations, etc., and trying to make it a part of their literacy missions, literacy initiatives, so that we can have impact at scale. So one of the pilots that we have done is in the largest state in India called the state of Uttar Pradesh, which has almost like 22 million children who are in the age groups of grade K to 5, and we have rolled it out over the last 1 year, and we have received a tremendous response from the state, and we continue rolling out newer programs with them, which are based on read along. So I'll stop right there and probably take more questions about the same.
Great, thank you, Anand. I'm sure there'll be questions for this later in the session. And instead of asking my own questions now, I think we'll move back to Stephanie and Tinsley. I see you're here, so let's give it another shot.
Sorry about that. Zoom decided to crash on us. So let's try this a second time. Thank you for your patience. All right. Can you see our screen okay and hear us this time?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know us at Curious Learning, let me give you a quick overview of what we do and what we've been doing recently. We work with partners in almost every aspect of what we do. And the main things we do is we curate and create kind of high impact, open source, Creative Commons, kind of early learning content. We see that that gets localized, and sometimes doing that ourselves or working with partners to do that. And then we look at ways of distributing this and getting it in the hands of kids. Most significantly, we focused on trying to get to families smartphones recently. And then the last thing we do is we look at the data, the usage data, and we're starting to develop a set of assessment techniques too that allow us to look at the data to measure the efficacy and the impact of the reach. So as most people here know, apps are really powerful. They provide a lot of great opportunity for us, real-time feedback to kids, allow us to kind of in real time estimate and assess what's happening, particularly with respect to reading skills for the work we're focused on. And they can be highly engaging when designed well. And they work before, during, and after a pandemic, which is nice. So we also there's a growing base of data kind of supporting how effective they can be too. The couple of things I'll point out right now is that the World Bank did a study in northern Nigeria with about 9,000 homes that Victor, I think, spoke about some yesterday, where some of the learning apps from our collection were used. And it showed that it was the second most effective kind of literacy learning intervention that had been studied in an RCT other than kind of one-on-one tutoring and learning camps. There was an earlier study done by UNICEF and the World Bank on Syrian refugees that showed about 22 hours of use of one of the apps equated to about 2 months of literacy learning in a well-resourced school. So I think we've reached the threshold where we believe, with the right apps and with good apps, they can be highly effective. So what's that mean? What's the road to scale? In other words, how do we get this into the hands of learners? Well, to set a little context that was alluded to during the introduction, in 2018, 27% of adults in India had smartphones and 25% in sub-Saharan Africa. It's projected that that would be at least 50% in both those regions by 2025, okay? So that starts us thinking that it's very possible to look at online campaigns that could be high impact and very cost effective. So we've started kind of experimenting on that. And this is a new project that we're doing with the World Bank, with the DIME group. And some preliminary tests that we've done give you kind of a hint to things that we're playing around with. We did some ad tests. These were Facebook ads in Kenya focusing on parents in Kibera. And we found that for about 4 cents, we can engage those parents with something they could click through. And we could reach teachers throughout Kenya for about 1/3 of a cent. We could get them to engage with watching a short video. In Bangladesh, for about 2 cents per download, we could get people to download one of the apps, install it. And in Nepal, we're in the midst of a larger test. After about 2.5 months, we've spent about $7,500 and garnered 120,000 downloads there. So this is hints at how online techniques can be used to kind of reach, much larger populations quickly. This is an example of an image of a kind of live map that shows where people are using our content. And we're using the data flowing back that not only fuels that map, but also to understand how we can better acquire learners or users, and how we can increase the retention and engagement across time for those learners. And this is an example of the kind of dashboard that we're using to kind of follow that longitudinal engagement as well as the learning that's happening there. So what's possible? This is, to the hopeful side, it was alluded to during the introduction, how can we leverage this and what could it mean? Well, let's take, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, only about 12% of 4th graders read for meaning. And we have a capacity to potentially reach close to 50% of the homes in sub-Saharan Africa through the smartphones that are already in the homes. And so theoretically, you could think about potentially quadrupling the literacy rates through this technique for something on the order. It's not unreasonable to think about it. It could be done on the order of like $5 per learner. Likewise, smartphones are dropping in price, and we're seeing ones that hit the market between $25 and $30 that could be coupled with a $15 solar charger, which means you can reach anyone for somewhere in the order of about $50 per learner. So that gives you a kind of quick overview of who we are, what we've been kind of looking at, and maybe plant some seeds for some further discussion and questions about what's possible. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We'll move quickly to the next panelist. That would be Lily Nyariki from the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, known as ADEA. Lily is ADEA's book development specialist and has worked for the public sector, NGOs, and international organizations for over 30 years. So Lily, very happy to have you as part of this panel. Could you give us a brief introduction of how ADEA is working with the literacy? You're on mute.
Is that okay? Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, so I was saying ADEA is a regional body working basically with the ministries of education. Those are our primary partners. We also work with many partners, including the African Development Bank and the Global Book Alliance and other partners that are also interested in literacy. And so ADEA is a forum for policy dialogue. We are more concerned in terms of looking for solutions of problems that affect the education sector. And of course, one of them is the issue of literacy, which, as you all know, is a fundamental skill. I mean, without being able to read and write, you remain behind in this world that we live in. And of course, now, as you mentioned earlier, there's the issue of the pandemic that has ravaged across Africa. Thankfully, not so adversely as was expected. But of course, the problems remain on the ground, because even before the pandemic, we had issues to do with literacy, especially not having enough books to go around schools, not to mention public libraries or school libraries. And so those are issues that we are still grappling with as ADEA. And since 2016, we've had a special program collaborating with the Global Book Alliance, for instance, and other partners to address these very issues. And so we have basically been working with partners on the ground, that is the stakeholders on the ground, mainly as, because I am a focal point for books and learning materials. And so our partners basically are the stakeholders within the book industries in Africa, represented by the National Publishers Association, Booksellers Associations, Writers Associations, Librarians Associations. So we've been working with them basically just to create awareness for the need to be systematic in terms of ensuring that books and other reading materials are easily available and accessible for children in schools. And of course, the emphasis now also is having books in homes, because it is clear that the pandemic kept the children away from the classrooms for quite a while. And so there are issues about how do children begin to continue rather to learn and to read. And so ADEA, along with the Minister of Education, we have been keeping track on that matter, and happy to report that a number of African countries actually took very proactive measures to ensure that at least children remain supplied with reading materials through radio, TV, in such like media, just so that the children remain at least well catered for in terms for their reading needs. Of course, the truth is that there are many children who did not have that kind of an opportunity, especially those ones who are out in the rural areas who do not have access to some of these services. So those are some of the issues that we are grappling with, but we are well aware of them, and we continue to work with partners, as I said, like the Global Book Alliance. For instance, we have held a number of workshops, writing workshops, for what we call Bloom software writing workshops. We have partnered with the Somme Institute for Linguistics, who are like specialists and have developed a software for helping teachers, parents, and anybody really who would want to write just simple books for children. And of course, on the ground also, we have had a number of partners that have kept in touch with us. We have involved them in our programs. The World Reader, for instance, I don't know whether you people know about the World Reader. They have a very interesting model for involving African publishers to develop books, digital materials rather, which are then offered through the World Reader app. And it is free for use. And we are very proud of that innovation, because at least it keeps a lot of children engaged in reading. Other initiatives that are African-based, of course, we have the African Storybook Project based in South Africa. And we have also been working with them in terms of ensuring that children are able to, know, first of all, to know that that service exists. And again, it is free. And what is good about the Storybook Project, for instance, is that through their app, children can read as well as adapt stories, rewrite stories, and issue them in different languages. So in a way, although there are many challenges on the ground, but there've been also very good activities or good initiatives that have been put in place to ensure that children in Africa continue to read. We would, of course, continue to work with new partners. I'm seeing already from the panelists, seemingly there will be some new partners that we would want to work with. And so really we keep on welcoming any ideas that can bring books close to children, despite and in spite the challenges that there are.
Thank you, Lily. That's quite an inspiring message. we do have a wealth of experience and perspectives here in the panel now, and I'm sure we could spend hours talking about some of the dilemmas and aspirations that we have in our line of work. I do encourage you in the audience to write down any questions or comments you may have in the chat box. I don't see any questions there yet, but it just told me, just popped in a quick question for Carolyn. He's asking, what are ways that Rotary could work with organizations on the panel and or those working on literacy at the local level? So exploring a bit more about partnerships. Carolyn, please.
Certainly. There are local Rotary clubs in most communities around the world, and certainly we are always looking for partners who can help us with the technical aspects of improving the quality of our work. We are working with a number of different organizations around the world. We have a partnership with the Global Partnership for Education in Kenya. We're working right now with Save the Children in the United States on an early literacy initiative. We work with an organization that was actually developed by Rotarians called the Free Reading Program. But all of these organizations, and I've taken good notes here about each of the ones that were presented this morning, because they are all potential partners that we would love to work with. The key is to get in touch with your local Rotary clubs and get in touch with local Rotarians or with international organizers like me who can pair you up. We have the interest, we oftentimes have the funding. What we're really looking for is the technical expertise so that our programs are of quality.
Great. I think we'll take a few more questions from the audience for all of the panelists. Victor from the World Bank is asking or commenting that today's presentations focused on EdTech home learning, which needs to be revolutionized and scaled considering how widespread learning poverty is. So how can we link these home learning approaches with school-based activities to reinforce learning? And is there a value of hybrid models that aim to connect teachers, parents, and children through EdTech platforms? Quite a broad question, and I'm sure most of you have reflections on that. So perhaps we'll start with Tinsley and Stephanie.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that great question. I mean, certainly it's clear that in the places in the world where very high rates of literacy are achieved, you have a very broad culture of literacy that connects all of these partners. So, you know, children are read to when they're very, very young by their parents, and then they go into schools, and there's a broad culture of literacy there that doesn't just, and the learning to read doesn't just happen at school. It's in the homes, it's in libraries, in the community, it's throughout the entire environment. So ideally, in other places in the world where we're seeing lower literacy rates, and certainly, you know, Lily pointed to the need for this also, that, you know, literacy would be broadened beyond the scope of just learning to read in school, but rather would be seen as an important activity at home, an important activity out in the community. And there's some degree of attitudinal change that has to happen that we're all working towards. Carolyn pointed to the need to think of reading as an activity that goes just, you know, beyond just reading words. Certainly we've worked in the past with partners where, you know, libraries have been built in places where the libraries was seen as kind of the exclusive domain of just adults, and children were not really welcome there. And so that implies, you know, an attitudinal change that also has to happen in order to make literacy, and not just reading, but literacy activities be shared across a community spectrum. And certainly that's something that we see in our work, that we work very hard to make content available to partners that could use that content in order to do that work, on the ground. We'd be thrilled to partner with any organization, certainly in our work with UNESCO, in our work with the World Bank. We are working to make learning to read something that is happening both at school and in a home environment, but also to engage in that behavioral change, to see literacy as a valuable activity, but also something that goes beyond the confines of the school.
Thank you. I'd like to perhaps challenge Anand and Lily. Do you have any reflections around connecting to school-based learning and teachers perhaps as well?
Sure. So I'll just quickly chime in here. So one of the things that we have also, when I talked about the state project, is that we did a survey of 200,000 teachers in the state. And one of the key things that we got to know was teachers wanted a good connect of the curriculum that is being taught in school at home as well, right? So one of the pilots that we are planning to do right now is having the school textbooks as well in the app, and see whether that increases engagement sitting at home. So that is one of the initiatives we are planning to try out. The other thing was that though reading is a dependent or a child-centric activity, the teachers are want to take ownership of the fact that they are able to nudge the children in the right direction, not just in school but even after that, right? Even when the children are at home, because in school, if the child needs to practice reading, they get very limited amount of time, right? If they want to read aloud, and the teacher needs to give them feedback. So we are actually coming up with a feature in the app where a teacher can monitor the amount of reading the child has done, right? Get some analytics on it in terms of what are the right words read, right? How much engaged they are, and so on, which could feed in back to the kind of literacy interventions that are needed in the classroom, right? So this kind of completes the feedback loop for a much more effective instruction in classroom by doing activities at home as well.
Thanks, Lily.
Yes, I think that it's a very important discussion we're having here. And I was just going to say that, the home environment is critical for children. And I think we need, as people on the ground, to have programs that are linked perhaps with the public libraries, where parents can borrow books and go and read with the children in the home environment. The trouble is that most public libraries are not well resourced. So I would want to just pose a question. If we all think that literacy is so important, then we do need to, jointly, I think, come up with strategies of how to resource some of these places that we know will certainly help our children, acquire literacy skills as early as can be. Because I think the problem is we all believe that literacy is fundamental, that in fact, literacy is, any other skill is dependent on acquiring the literacy skill in the first place. And yet we don't seem to work towards ensuring that these skills are acquired by children at the right age, from the right places, because I do believe that libraries, especially public libraries and school libraries, are very key places where children can easily be helped to acquire literacy skills. And of course, all these gadgets that we're talking about, the apps and all, they too will play a big role in terms of helping children acquire the literacy skills. I mean, of course, some of us are traditionalists, we believe in the actual book, but I also do know that the apps, digital materials complement very well what we have as print materials. So for me, I think it's really just concerted effort that is required from all of us to do really what is required to ensure that children resourced enough in terms of reading materials, be they digital materials, be they print materials.
Thanks. You have a great point about the complementarity of different interventions, different types of technology here as well. I'd like to build on that for a bit, and I'm using my privilege as moderator here now because I see more comments and questions coming in from the audience. But we are operating in a context of crisis now with the ongoing pandemic. And governments, decision makers are facing competing demands for investments. Budgets are stretched, political attention is quite stretched. And we know that having good products or just one good product isn't really enough to make sure literary gains are achieved. So having a good product is one thing. I'm thinking a bit about what Jane from Lobuto Library Partners said yesterday during the opening remarks of the members' day of the symposium, that technology isn't necessarily sustainable in itself. And she said something around that it shouldn't be sustainable either. Technology should be developed and replaced as time passes, and that's sort of the nature of innovation as well. While the impacts that we're aiming for, the impact should be sustainable based on the development of the ecosystem and the institutionalization that we contribute to. So sort of keeping this in mind or having that as perhaps a background, what would you and the panel say is the biggest challenge that you face to achieve sustainable impact and actual durable improvement in literacy gains? Carolyn, perhaps you could jump into this first.
That's a huge question. I think improving the quality of teachers and improving the quality of what's happening in the classroom is the key to sustainability. The teachers are members of the community, and so to show that they're valued, to provide the right resources, to treat them as professionals, I think does wonders for really reinforcing the importance of school and the impact of school, and showing parents that it's important to keep their children in school beyond the primary grades, particularly keeping girls in school beyond. So working with teachers, making sure that they are well trained, well supported is key, because then they can take the message to the parents. And during the time of the pandemic, schools in many places are still closed. That support for teachers will often relate to their offering to keep the education chain open. We've been doing a lot of work with teachers in Guatemala where they're getting together and we're doing mobile libraries. They're sending packets of books home with the children on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, so that there's still education, there's still a link back to school that has been ongoing. And we expect that we will get many more children back to school when the schools reopen than we would have if there had just been this radio silence for many, many months. And for me, I think the sustainable part is really investing in our teachers.
Great point, and I'm really happy to hear that coming from an educational background myself and working with education more broadly. It's certainly a central point. Anand, can I challenge you to reflect a bit about on the sustainability and how you're working to make sure the effects that you achieve through Google Read Along contribute to more of a bigger sustainable impact, so to speak?
Sorry, I was on mute. So yeah, so I think in general, developing the reading skills for a child itself, contributes to a larger goal in terms of child learning more and helping the child develop further in life, right? In terms of sustenance, the reason why, so as I said, one of the key things that we are doing now is trying to enter uh, within the system where the change can be at a larger scale and at a sustained level, right? So that's why we consciously are trying to now work with the governments, the ministries of education, etc., because that's where we believe that who are the group of people working towards the most under-resourced and the most needed segment of users, right? Segment of children who need this a lot, and that's where we believe that the most change can be made. So apart from just putting read along as a technology, we are working on a 360-degree feedback wherein we understand from these stakeholders the voices from the ground in terms of what are the different features or what exactly do we need to build around that. So that is in terms of the product. But in general, in terms of the program itself, right, we run various different initiatives to see what works better. Like last year for the International Literacy Day, we actually ran a campaign called a Storyathon with the entire state of UP, wherein we invited children to read stories on read along and contribute stories themselves. So the top stories that they wrote, was judged by a panel of experts and then published on read along as well, right? So we are looking at not just to ensure a sustained improvement and usage of the app, right? We are looking at both product improvement as well as a programmatic approach to ensure that the learning outcomes are met.
Thanks. I see that we're approaching the end of our session in a few minutes, so I want to give Lily 1 minute and then Tinsley and Stephanie 1 minute as well to reflect a bit on what some of the biggest challenges you face in contributing to sustainable impact on literacy achievement is. So Lily, please, 1 minute.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you
Unfortunately,
now.
I'm not so clear anymore because it's raining quite heavily here. But I take it that it's the last word you're asking us to give.
Sure,
Yes,
this is your last chance.
So I think for us in ADEA, what we are focusing on really is policy on the ground to ensure that we have well-regulated book industries where we have situations where authors, publishers, booksellers, librarians, and government officials are working together smoothly to be able to ensure that reading materials are produced regularly and in adequate numbers, as well as in the right languages for the children to be able to pick the literacy skills as they attend school and as they grow up to be people who can be relied upon in the world of work. And so I also want to take this opportunity for this invitation. I think it was timely, and I look forward to networking with all of you, because ADEA is also an institution where we look out for networking and collaboration among people who do the same things like us. And so thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks for the encouraging last words, Lily. Stephanie and Tinsley, the floor is yours.
Yes, Stephanie's gonna put our contact information into the chat so people have it. I guess what I would say is that one of the things we do know is that it's highly unusual for a literate parent to raise an illiterate child. They understand the power of it and they go out of their way to try to make sure their children have access to something and they have the skills to help them learn to read. So there's an argument to be made that one of the ways to think about this from a sustainable standpoint is how do we get a whole generation literate? How do we effectively inoculate the planet against illiteracy? You know, and that kind of in the face of the pandemic and in the face of thinking that way, it's kind of like, how do we start thinking about literacy, you know, like we think about global health issues? And in fact, it is a global health issue, right? So what does that mean? How do we think about, and the beauty of digital approaches is that it is, you know, free and open and easily usable by anybody and everybody across the whole spectrum. And the larger percentage of any population you get literacy, the better it is for everybody and the easier it is to reach the balance of the people. So.
A great point to take with us and reflect more upon.
Okay.
Towards the end now, I'd just like to say that I believe that everyone attending the session today has a role to play in turning this the aspiration of universal literacy from an aspiration to a reality. We all have a role to play. As a government owner, we in Norad is working to integrate technology and innovative approaches in our broader education portfolio to make sure that tech-based literacy interventions aren't just one-off pilots interventions, but that they can actually be used at scale and at a sustainable level. If you want to learn more about the way that we accelerate partnerships for literacy through the Global Digital Library, I recommend that you log on to the panel session on Youth Digital Champions on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. My good colleague Krister will share more about that then. So I'm afraid we're out of time now. There is another session starting. So thank you so much to all of the panelists and thank you for engaging with the audience. And I see that there's still lots of comments and questions we weren't able to respond to here, but thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. And I'm sure we'll continue this conversation during the next few days as well. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.